There is a chilling prophecy whispered in the darkest corridors of human psychology, one that dictates the absolute pinnacle of your success is the exact moment your execution begins.
Friedrich Nietzsche once looked into the abyss of power and left a haunting warning for those who rule the world. I am one who must always conquer himself. He knew that the most dangerous army you will ever face lives behind your own ribs.
Exactly 1 century before Nietzsche wrote those words, Europe trembled before a man who believed he was a god, Napoleon Bonaparte. He defeated every king. He shattered every alliance. He conquered the continent. But in the silent laboratory of his mind, an untamed, arrogant ego was writing his own doom.
He marched into the frozen emptiness of Russia, not to fight an army, but to feed a hunger that had no limits. Tonight, let us watch how the world's greatest conqueror was broken, not by the winter, but by the one enemy he forgot to conquer, himself. Welcome to the dark heart of power.
As the Grand Armée marched deeper into the frozen wasteland, the environment became a mirror of Napoleon's internal decay. The temperature dropped to -30, but the real frost was inside the emperor's heart. He was no longer fighting a war of strategy. He was screaming at the universe, demanding that history obey his past glory.
This is exactly what Nietzsche warned us about. When an ego becomes supreme, it constructs a beautiful, gold-plated prison. Inside this labyrinth, every victory is an illusion, and every critic is an enemy. Napoleon's mind could no longer process reality. It could only process his own myth. The retreat from Moscow was not just a military defeat. It was the public execution of a man who thought he was a god. Walking through the snow, stripped of his invincible mask, Bonaparte had to look at his own hands. For the first time in his life, the conqueror of Europe was completely powerless against the phantom in his own mind. Nietzsche's law is absolute and spares no one. If you do not conquer yourself daily, your past success becomes the heavy stone that drowns you. Napoleon's crown didn't fall because of British gold or Russian winter. It fell because when he looked into the mirror of absolute power, he didn't see a leader. He saw an untamed monster. The smell of blood in the Russian snow reached every throne in Europe. The kings who once bowed to Napoleon realized the Titan was bleeding. A grand coalition was born, not out of courage, but out of absolute survival. They didn't just want to defeat an empire. They wanted to destroy the myth of the invincible man. At Leipzig, the battlefield became an altar of sacrifice. For 3 days, Napoleon fought like a cornered beast, directing his remaining boys into the meat grinder. But history was no longer responding to his commands. Every tactical genius he possessed was neutralized by a simple, brutal reality. He was outnumbered, outplayed, and completely alone. They stripped him of his titles and exiled him to the tiny island of Elba. To the world, the story was over. But an untamed ego cannot live in a cage. In the quiet Mediterranean breeze, Napoleon didn't reflect on his sins. He meditated on his resurrection. He convinced himself that the French people were weeping for their god. In the spring of 1815, the monster escaped.
He landed on the coast of France, and with nothing but his name, he reclaimed an empire in 100 days. It was the ultimate gamble of human ambition. Europe watched in absolute horror as the ghost of Napoleon marched toward his final, bloody destiny.
On the muddy fields of Waterloo, the skies opened and the rain poured, delaying the battle. Napoleon waited, confident that time was his servant. But the mud wasn't just slowing down his cannons. It was the physical manifestation of reality, grinding his stubborn ambition to a halt. For the first time in his life, Napoleon's ultimate weapon, his Imperial Guard, faltered. As they retreated through the smoke, the Emperor's face turned pale. It wasn't just a battle being lost. The entire temple of his self
Again, not to a nearby island, but to a barren rock in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, St. Helena. Here, with no armies left to command, the world's greatest conqueror spent his final days talking to the ghosts of his past, trapped in the prison of his unyielding pride.
This is the dark heart of power. Napoleon believed he had conquered Europe, but he failed the only test that ever mattered, Nietzsche's law. He could not conquer himself. And in the end, the absolute pinnacle of his success was indeed the exact moment his execution began.
On that isolated rock, Napoleon had nothing left but time. And time is a brutal mirror for an unyielding ego. Every night, the man who once rewrote the maps of the world was forced to sit in the dark, listening to the waves, realizing that his greatest enemy was never Great Britain or Russia. It was the phantom he nourished in his own reflection.
The ghost of Napoleon didn't die on that rock. It didn't disappear into history. It moved into the shadow of every human mind. The battlefield is no longer a muddy field in Europe. It is the silent, ongoing war within yourself. The same untamed beast that drove a tyrant to freeze in Russia is the very ego that tempts you to destroy your own peace today.
Imagine a different history. What if Napoleon had conquered his own ego? If he had stopped before Moscow, if he had chosen peace over absolute dominance, he would have saved an empire. But the tragic paradox of human greatness is this: the very hunger that creates a conqueror is the exact same hunger that makes it impossible for him to stop.
When you refuse to tame your ego, every success you achieve becomes another brick in your own prison. You think you are conquering your world, your career, your status, your desires, but you are only building a magnificent, gold-plated cage. In the end, you are not the ruler of your destiny. You are just the most well-dressed prisoner in the room.
But reality has a brutal way of breaking the myths we build around ourselves. No matter how many victories you score against the world, you cannot outrun the shadow in your own mirror. When the fated storm finally arrives, your stubborn ambition will not save you. The illusion cracks, and the God you thought you were is brought to his knees.
Look into your own mirror. The monster is not out there in the world. It is the very beat of your frantic heart, desperate for control. But remember Nietzsche's ultimate warning. All the status you chase and the empires you build in your head mean absolutely nothing when the beat that sustained your ego finally stops. Conquering the world is easy. Can you conquer yourself?